My name is Martha Jenkins. I'm 68 years old and I've lived in the same small town in Ohio for nearly my entire life. For years, my Sunday dinners were the heartbeat of this family, a tradition that once brought laughter, conversation, and warmth into this house. I had spent the entire morning preparing. The smell of rosemary and lemon filled my kitchen as I pulled the salmon out of the oven, the same recipe my grandkids used to love. Or at least I thought they did. I set the table with the old china, the set my late husband and I had received as a wedding gift. The delicate blue flowers had faded over time, but it still felt like the right touch for family gatherings. As I straightened the silverware and adjusted my blouse, I caught myself smiling at the thought of the evening ahead. I imagined the kids running through the hallway, the sound of their laughter echoing through the rooms. I imagined my son Michael telling me about his latest project at work, and my daughter-in-law Linda sharing her usual sharp but harmless commentary about everything from the weather to her colleagues. But those were just memories. Things had changed. I just hadn't realized how much until that night. When they arrived, the energy was different. The front door opened, and instead of warm hugs, there were distracted greetings. Michael gave me a half-hearted kiss on the cheek. Linda walked in without even making eye contact, tossing a grocery bag onto the kitchen counter and muttering something about bringing wine. The grandkids barely looked up from their phones. I tried to push the discomfort aside as I invited them to sit at the table. I smiled, asked about their week, tried to pull everyone into conversation like I always did. Michael grunted a few vague answers. Linda scrolled through her phone between bites. The kids poked at their food like I had served them something foreign. I kept thinking it was just one of those off days. Maybe everyone was tired. Maybe it was stress. I stirred the conversation towards something I thought would lift the mood. The Disneyland trip. The grandkids had been buzzing about it the last time they were here. When I mentioned it, Michael exchanged a look with Linda. It was the kind of glance people give each other when they're about to say something unpleasant. My stomach tightened. Linda set her fork down, crossed her arms, and spoke. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't upset. It was cold, almost rehearsed. Martha, there's no space for you in the van. You'd only slow everyone down. For a moment, I didn't even understand what she was saying. I blinked. I opened my mouth, then closed it again because no words would come out. The table suddenly felt much quieter. Even the kids had stopped tapping their screens. I stared at Michael, waiting for him to correct her. Waiting for him to say, "No, Mom, that's not true." But he didn't. He kept his eyes on his plate, like he hadn't heard anything at all. My hands felt heavy in my lap. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face calm, dignified. It was like someone had pulled the rug out from under me, but I was too proud to let them see me fall. I managed a small nod. I told myself not to cry, not here, not in front of them. But inside, something shattered. Something that I wasn't sure could be put back together again. I had spent years telling myself that if I kept trying, if I kept being the supportive mother, the helpful grandmother, the reliable one, then I would always belong here. I thought I was part of this family. I thought I mattered. But sitting there at that table, hearing those words, watching my son look away, I realized something I never wanted to admit. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't belong here at all. The smell of baked salmon filled the kitchen, mingling with hints of lemon and rosemary. I carefully pulled the dish from the oven, adjusting the position of the fillets just the way Ethan, my grandson, liked them. He had always loved this meal, or at least he used to. I smiled to myself, remembering how he would go back for seconds without saying a word, just quietly piling more onto his plate like it was his secret, guilty pleasure. I set the table with the blue and white china, the set that had seen birthdays, anniversaries, and countless Sunday dinners. Each plate was placed just so. Napkins folded neatly, glasses polished until they sparkled. I stepped back and looked at the table with a kind of hopeful pride. Maybe tonight would be like it used to be. Maybe, just maybe, we could laugh like before. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed down my blouse and hurried to greet them. Michael walked in first, barely making eye contact, mumbling a quick hey before moving toward the living room. Linda followed right behind him, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She handed me a bottle of cheap wine with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Said it was for dinner, then brushed past me like she had somewhere more important to be. The kids were the last to come in. Ethan didn't look up from his phone as he flopped onto the couch. Emma gave me a half-hearted wave before joining him, her thumbs already flying across her screen. I stood there for a second, watching them, the lump in my throat growing a little heavier. But I pushed it down, telling myself it was just the way kids were these days. "Dinner's ready," I announced, forcing a cheerful tone. "Let's all come to the table." They moved slowly as if I'd asked them to do something terribly inconvenient. Michael sat down, scrolling through something on his phone until Linda shot him a look, and he shoved it into his pocket. The kids dragged their feet, Ethan sighing loudly like the effort might just ruin his whole day. I started serving, placing an extra-large portion of salmon on Ethan's plate. I remembered how much he loved it. Or at least I thought he did. "Made your favorite, sweetie," I said with a small smile. He glanced down, poked at it with his fork, then mumbled he didn't really like salmon. Said he never had. For a moment, my hands froze midair. I looked at him then, at Michael, who simply shrugged like it was nothing. Linda didn't even bother looking up. "Eat what's there," she said in a clipped voice. "Your grandma worked hard on this." Ethan rolled his eyes, but picked at his plate anyway. I tried again, desperate to pull the evening together. "So how's work going, Michael? Any progress on the shopping complex?" He didn't even lift his head. "Fine," he said. "Just fine." Not much to say. Linda jumped in before I could try another question. "Oh, you wouldn't be interested, Martha?" It's all pretty technical. Her words hit like tiny cuts. Not cruel on the surface, but dismissive. As if any curiosity I had was unwelcome, out of place. I shifted in my seat, trying to steady my voice. "How about the kids' school going all right?" I asked, reaching for something safe, something that would invite conversation. Ethan muttered his swim meets were done 2 weeks ago, then went silent. Emma didn't even answer, just shrugged while scrolling through whatever was more important than this dinner. I blinked. I could have sworn he'd said those meets were coming up soon. Had I gotten it wrong, or had I just been left out? I sipped my water, staring down at my hands. The air felt heavier, the silences longer. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This house had once been filled with laughter, conversation, and joy. Now it was filled with tension, eye rolls, and cold, detached small talk. Then it came. Linda set down her fork, folded her hands, and leaned slightly forward with that businesslike smile she always wore when delivering bad news. "So we wanted to tell you about the Disneyland trip." Her voice was oddly upbeat, like she was reading a promotional ad. I perked up, finally, something we could share, something to look forward to. "Oh yes, the kids mentioned it last week." "When are we going?" Michael cleared his throat, but didn't meet my eyes. Linda jumped in without missing a beat. "Well, we're going in 2 weeks. It's going to be wonderful. A big family trip." I nodded, waiting for the rest. I started thinking about what I'd pack, how I'd manage my arthritis walking around the park. I imagined seeing the grandkids light up at the parades, the fireworks. Then her next words landed like a punch to the chest. "But there's no room for you in the van." She said it with a straight face, her tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. "You'd only slow everyone down." My breath caught. I stared at her, then at Michael, then back at her again, waiting for someone to laugh, waiting for someone to say it was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything. But no one did. Michael just shifted, uncomfortably focusing on cutting his salmon into smaller and smaller pieces. The kids avoided looking at me entirely. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I felt my face go hot, my hands tremble under the table. I swallowed hard, forcing the lump in my throat back down where it belonged. I nodded slightly, pretending like it didn't sting, pretending like it made sense. But in that moment, surrounded by the people I had loved more than anything, it had never been more clear. I wasn't part of this family anymore. The moment the front door closed behind them, the house fell into an unnatural silence. I stood there for a while, listening to the faint sound of their car engine fading down the street, wondering how something so familiar could suddenly feel so foreign. This home, once filled with laughter and conversation, now echoed with nothing but emptiness and the sharp sting of rejection. I gathered the plates in silence, my hands moving, almost automatically scrubbing and rinsing, while my mind struggled to make sense of what had just happened. Their words kept replaying over and over. No space for you. You'd only slow everyone down. Each time it hit me like a fresh slap, leaving me raw and aching. When I bent down to pick up a fallen napkin beneath the dining table, I noticed something else lying near the chair where Linda had been sitting. A folded sheet of paper. At first I thought it was a receipt, or maybe some grocery list she had dropped without noticing. I reached for it, intending to set it aside for the next time they visited. But as my fingers unfolded the crisp paper, my breath caught. There, printed clearly at the top, were the words "booking confirmation." My eyes darted down the page, scanning the details without meaning to. Disneyland. Departure date. Hotel accommodations. And then, right there in bold, something that made my heart stop. Vehicle, 15-passenger luxury van. My hands trembled as I traced the list of names underneath. Michael, Linda, Ethan, Emma, Linda's parents, her sister, her brother-in-law, their 3 kids, even Linda's cousin, someone I'd met maybe twice in my life. 14 names in total. 14. The math hit me like a punch to the chest. 15 seats. 14 people. 1 seat left. 1 open seat. A seat they told me did not exist. I sat down heavily in the nearest chair, the paper shaking in my hands. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at those names, reading them over and over, as though if I looked long enough the truth might change. But it didn't. They hadn't told me there was no space because it was true. They told me there was no space because they didn't want me there. Not an accident. Not a mistake. A choice. A decision made quietly behind my back. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it did nothing to hold back the wave of pain surging through me. My chest ached in a way I didn't know was possible. This wasn't just about a trip. It was about being discarded, about realizing with horrifying clarity that my place in this family had become optional. All these years, I convinced myself that the coldness, the short visits, the forgotten birthdays were just part of life. Everyone was busy. Everyone had their own problems. I told myself I was lucky they still came by at all. I told myself that was love. But love doesn't lie like this. I stood pacing the kitchen, gripping that paper like it was some awful secret the universe had let slip into my hands. The images of tonight played back in brutal detail. Michael looking anywhere but at me. Linda's polite but soulless smile. The way Ethan and Emma barely noticed I existed beyond serving their dinner. Somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief, something else began to stir. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The realization that this was not just about them. it was also about me, about how I had let it get this far, how I had made myself small for them. Convenient. Invisible. I walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. The same street where I'd watched Michael take his first steps on a tricycle, where I had waved him off to prom, where I stood on the porch and cried the day he moved out to start his own family. Now I stood here invisible to that family I helped build. But maybe that invisibility was something I could use. Maybe for the first time in decades, I could disappear not because they pushed me aside, but because I chose to. Not as someone left behind, but as someone who decided to step away. The paper slipped from my fingers, drifting to the floor like a final confirmation of everything I didn't want to believe. I looked at it one last time, my chest still heavy, but my jaw set tighter than it had been all night. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd quietly accept being excluded, being treated like baggage too inconvenient to carry. But they were wrong. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had shifted inside me, something that wasn't going back. The morning after that dinner, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by something I couldn't quite see. My chest was still heavy, my head thick with thoughts that wouldn't settle. I tried distracting myself by tidying up the house, wiping countertops that were already clean, folding dish towels that didn't need folding. Midway through my second cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. It was Michael. His message was short. Could I swing by their place and water the plants while they were out running errands? Of course I could. After all, wasn't that what I was useful for? I grabbed my keys, forced my face into something resembling normal, and drove over. Their house was bigger than mine. Shinier. Newer. Filled with sleek furniture and spotless marble floors that gleamed in the sunlight. It always made me feel a little out of place walking in, like I had to shrink myself to fit into their perfectly curated world. The keys were exactly where Michael always left them, inside the flower pot by the front door. I let myself in, humming a little as I moved from room to room, checking each plant, giving them the water they needed. For a few minutes, I actually felt calm, focused on something simple, something that made sense. Then I noticed the folder sitting on the edge of the kitchen island. A plain manila folder, nothing flashy, just barely cracked open with papers spilling out. It looked like something Michael had forgotten to put away. I didn't mean to pry. I really didn't. But when I reached over to push it aside, my eye caught my own name printed across the top sheet. I froze. My fingertips grazed the page. Loan agreement. Collateral property at 1125 Maplewood Lane. My house. I stared unblinking as the words started to sharpen in my mind. My house. The very home my late husband and I built together. The home I had raised Michael in. The home that was supposed to be mine until the day I couldn't live in it anymore. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Appraisal reports, bank statements, copies of my old will, highlighted sections about inheritance expectations, future ownership, estimated property value. It was all there. Michael had walked into a bank, handed them paperwork, claiming his future inheritance of my home, and leveraged it for a loan. I wasn't just a footnote in those documents. I was the asset. I sank onto one of their bar stools, staring down at the pile of betrayal in front of me. A deep, ugly kind of numbness crept up from my stomach into my throat. My own son had made financial decisions on the assumption that I would either die soon enough for him to collect, or stay quiet long enough for him to benefit. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the air wasn't getting to my lungs. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional, cold, calculated. Somewhere in the stack was a line that nearly made me gag. Loan secured against future inheritance. As if I were already gone. As if my life, my presence, my existence were just an inconvenient delay in his financial plans. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. All these years I thought I was helping. Babysitting on short notice. Lending them money when they hit a rough patch. Being the always available grandmother. The reliable mom. The one who never said no. I told myself it was love. That this was just what families did. But this was not love. This was exploitation, dressed up as family duty. I stood up, clutching the counter to steady myself. My legs felt like jelly, but my mind was suddenly sharper than it had been in years. Every sacrifice I had made, every moment I bit my tongue to keep the peace, every dinner I cooked while they barely noticed I was in the room. It all came rushing back, each memory twisted by the realization of what it actually meant to them. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a house, a bank account, a safety net they assumed would always be there. I pressed my palms hard against the marble countertop, trying to stop my hands from shaking. The rage bubbled up fast, pushing against the grief, the disappointment, the hurt. It was a fire I hadn't felt in years. A fire I didn't even know was still alive inside me. For a moment, I considered walking out, leaving it all untouched, pretending I never saw it. But no, not this time. Not after everything. I picked up the folder, held it tight, then thought better of it. Let it stay right where he left it. Let them never suspect I knew. Not yet. I walked to the front door, glanced back once at the house that now looked different to me. Not a family home. Not anymore. Just walls. Just floors. Just a place where someone once believed they belonged. I locked the door behind me, slid the key back under the flower pot, and stood there on the porch as something inside me shifted for good. The sadness was still there. The betrayal still a fresh wound. But beneath it, something else started to grow. Something solid. Something strong. If they thought I was just an asset. If they believed I was theirs to claim. Then it was time they learned just how wrong they were. I barely slept that night. I laid there staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything press against my chest. Every word from that dinner echoed in my head. Every line from those loan documents replayed like a cruel whisper, reminding me of exactly how little I mattered to them. At first it was just sadness. A deep, hollow ache that felt like it could swallow me whole. But as the hours dragged on, sadness began twisting into something sharper. Something clearer. A realization that I had spent years folding myself smaller and smaller, believing that if I just stayed useful, I would always have a place. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep waiting for scraps of affection from people who only saw me when they needed something. My hands trembled as I reached for the old address book tucked away in my nightstand. Flipping through the pages worn thin from time, my finger paused at a name that felt like a warm memory in the middle of all this cold. Evelyn Carter, my dearest friend from high school. We had shared everything once, but life had pulled us in different directions. She moved out west to Sunset Bay years ago, chasing a quieter life by the ocean. I stayed here, anchored by duty, by family, by the idea that my life was supposed to revolve around them. I picked up the phone and dialed before I could second-guess myself. The line rang twice before her familiar voice answered, surprised but bright, like no time had passed at all. Hearing her laugh stirred something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. I told her everything. Every painful detail about the dinner, the Disneyland lie, the loan I never consented to. I expected pity, maybe even shock. But what I got was exactly what I needed. She didn't gasp or fumble for empty comforts. Instead, she said the words that planted themselves deep in my bones. Martha, you have given enough. You've spent your life building everyone else's happiness. When is it your turn? You are not a burden. You are not furniture they get to shuffle around. You are a whole person. You deserve a life that feels like yours. For a moment, I just sat there gripping the phone, letting her words settle in like sunlight warming cold skin. It was as if someone had finally cracked a window in a room I hadn't realized had been sealed shut for decades. Evelyn told me about Sunset Bay, about her little house with the white porch overlooking the ocean, about the walking trails, the small cafes, the community art center. A place where people actually looked each other in the eye. A place where life moved a little slower, but felt a whole lot fuller. She told me there was a small cottage for sale right next to hers. Modest. Cozy. Perfect for starting over. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine something different. Waking up to the sound of waves. Drinking coffee on a porch with no one expecting anything from me. Painting. Volunteering at the museum Evelyn worked at. Meeting people who saw me not as someone's mother or grandmother, but simply as Martha. When the call ended, I stood in the middle of my kitchen and looked around. The same walls that had once felt like home now felt suffocating. Every picture frame, every piece of furniture, every memory tied to a life that revolved around being what everyone else needed me to be. I ran my fingers over the edge of the counter and made my decision. No more waiting for them to change. No more hoping to be chosen. If I wanted a different life, I had to choose it for myself. By noon, I had already called a real estate agent. I explained that I wanted the house listed immediately. I told him I was ready to move fast, no delays. When he asked if I was sure, I didn't even hesitate. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about teaching Michael or Linda a lesson. This was about dignity, about self-respect, about refusing to be an afterthought in my own life. I wouldn't tell them. Not yet. Let them go on thinking I was still here, watering their plants, waiting for their convenience. By the time they realized, I would be gone. Not lost, not abandoned, but free. I stood by the window, watching the afternoon sun hit the trees in my yard. For the first time in a long time, I felt something powerful stir deep in my chest. Not sadness, not fear. Freedom. It was time to start living. For me. The day I arrived in Sunset Bay, the sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. The salty breeze carried a warmth that wrapped around me like a quiet welcome. As the car rounded the last bend, the town came into view, nestled along the curve of the shoreline, with rows of pastel-colored houses overlooking the endless blue of the ocean. My new home stood at the corner of a quiet street just 2 blocks from the beach. A small white cottage with blue shutters and a wide front porch that faced the sea. The moment I stepped onto that porch, I felt something inside me loosen, like a tight knot, finally beginning to unwind. The real estate agent handed me the keys with a smile, but it was Evelyn's embrace that truly made it feel real. She was waiting on the porch, her silver hair tied back, her face glowing with excitement. She squeezed my hands and told me this was the beginning of something beautiful. Walking through the front door, I was greeted by sunlight spilling through every window. The living room was simple, but cozy, with worn hardwood floors and shelves, just waiting to be filled with books and photographs. The kitchen was small but perfect, and the bedroom had a large window that opened toward the ocean. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. But it was mine. That first evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves. The sound was steady, soothing, like a heartbeat I hadn't realized I missed. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. The next few days were a whirlwind of settling in. Evelyn introduced me to nearly everyone on our street. There was Ben, a retired fisherman with a laugh as loud as the ocean. Across from me lived Thomas and Patricia, an older couple who spent their mornings gardening and their afternoons feeding seagulls down by the dock. Each person greeted me like an old friend, offering smiles, baked goods, and stories about this little town I was now part of. Evelyn wasted no time pulling me into her world. On my third day, she dragged me along to a painting class held every Wednesday at the community center. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush since high school, but the moment the bristles touched the canvas, something stirred deep inside me. The instructor encouraged us to paint what made us feel free. Without thinking, I started sketching the waves, the cliffs, the boats swaying gently in the harbor. I wasn't good at first, but it didn't matter. Each brushstroke felt like stitching a little piece of myself back together. With every shade of blue and green, I mixed a bit of that old heaviness faded. Soon after, Evelyn introduced me to Mark, the director of the local museum, a small but charming place that told the history of Sunset Bay through photographs, artifacts, and stories passed down over generations. When he mentioned they needed more volunteer tour guides, Evelyn practically shoved me forward. Nervous but curious, I agreed. It didn't take long to fall in love with it. Leading groups of visitors, sharing stories about shipwrecks, lighthouse keepers, and the families who built this town filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I missed. People listened. They smiled. They asked questions. And for the first time in years, I felt heard. Days melted into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were for walks along the beach, toes sinking into cool sand as the tide rolled in. Afternoons were for painting, volunteering, or sharing coffee with Evelyn on her porch. Evenings often ended with a simple dinner, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, always followed by sitting out under the stars, listening to the waves whisper against the shore. I found joy in the smallest things: picking fresh flowers from the local farmer's market, learning how to cook seafood from Ben, who insisted no one should live by the ocean without knowing how to make clam chowder, watching children fly kites along the bluff, their laughter carried by the wind. And somewhere in those quiet, beautiful moments, I began to understand something I had forgotten. I was still me. Not just someone's mother, not just a grandmother, not just a placeholder in someone else's life, but a whole person. A woman capable of choosing happiness, of building a life that felt rich and full. It surprised me how quickly the ache of the past started to fade. Not because the memories disappeared, not because the hurt had vanished, but because this new life was filling me with something stronger. Something softer but steadier. A kind of happiness that didn't depend on anyone else choosing me, because I had finally chosen myself. As I sat one evening on my porch, watching the sun sink beneath the horizon, the sky bleeding into the water, I realized something. This wasn't just a fresh start. This wasn't just an escape. This was home. And for the first time in a very long time, I truly felt free. It was a crisp morning when I first saw his car pull up along the narrow street in Sunset Bay. The sharp silver paint stood out against the rows of pastel houses like something that didn't belong here. My heart thudded for a moment, not out of fear, but out of something heavier. Anticipation. Michael stepped out of the car, looking worn but furious. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark with a kind of desperation I hadn't seen before. He scanned the street locked onto my house and marched straight toward the front porch like a storm ready to break. I sat there in my rocking chair, cup of coffee in hand, waiting. I had imagined this moment more times than I could count over the past few weeks. There had been a time when just the sight of his disappointed face would have made me shrink, scramble to smooth things over. But that time was gone. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stomped up the steps, standing there like a man ready to deliver a punishment. His voice cracked as he spat out his first words. I hope you're happy. Do you have any idea what you've done? I set my coffee down carefully on the table beside me. I kept my eyes on the ocean, letting the sound of the waves steady me. Then I turned to him, calm, measured. Michael, what exactly do you think I've done? His hands flailed in the air, his voice rising. The bank. The loan. They're threatening foreclosure. You sold the house, Mom. Without telling anyone. Without telling me. I tilted my head. Without telling you. Like when you took out a loan using my house as collateral. Without telling me. He blinked, faltering for just a second, but quickly recovered, his voice turning defensive. That was different. I was planning for our future. For the business. For the family. I stood up, then slowly but purposefully. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words carried their own weight. Michael, I am not your backup plan. I am not a line item in your financial spreadsheet. His face flushed deep red, whether from guilt or rage I couldn't quite tell. You're being selfish. You abandoned your family. You left us in the middle of this mess. How could you? I folded my arms steady, unmoved. No, Michael. What I did was stop allowing myself to be used. What I did was finally choose me. His voice cracked as he tried to speak again, but nothing came out for a long moment. Then he shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You left everything behind. You left me behind. I sighed, feeling the ache of those words, but refusing to let it crack my resolve. No, Michael. You left me behind years ago. Every canceled Sunday dinner. Every favor asked without a thank you. Every time you looked right through me until you needed something. I stayed. I waited. I forgave. Until I realized you never intended to change. He dropped down onto the porch step, running his hands through his hair. The anger was draining from his face, now replaced by something more raw. Frustration. Maybe even fear. You don't understand. We're drowning, Mom. The loan. The payments. The bank wants it all now. And whose decision was that? I asked quietly. You signed those papers. You made those choices. Without me. You gambled with something that was never yours to wager. He didn't respond. Just stared at the floorboards like the answers might be hiding in the grain of the wood. I sat back down, hands folded in my lap. You can be mad. You can blame me if it helps you sleep at night. But I won't fix this for you. I won't sacrifice the life I finally built just so you can keep pretending none of this is your fault. For a long time, there was only the sound of the waves filling the air between us. He finally stood up, his shoulders sagging in a way I had never seen before. There was no fire left in him, only confusion, maybe regret. I met his eyes and held them. I hope you figure it out, Michael. I really do. But I won't go back to being invisible just so you can feel comfortable. His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but no words came. He shoved his hands in his pockets and turned away, walking back down the steps. The car door slammed. The engine growled to life. And just like that, he was gone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Not with fear, not with sadness, but with the solid grounding weight of knowing that, for the first time in my life, I had stood fully in my own truth. And it felt like freedom. Michael didn't leave right away. After the heat of our confrontation settled into silence, he lingered on the porch like a man realizing he'd been standing in the wrong place his entire life. His hands stayed buried in his pockets, his eyes shifting between the horizon and the floorboards beneath his feet. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, frayed around the edges. I didn't know it had gotten this bad, Mom. I watched him for a moment, feeling that familiar tug between love and hurt. Part of me wanted to reach out to smooth it over like I had always done. But the wiser part of me knew this conversation needed to happen raw and honest without pretending anymore. It didn't get this bad overnight, Michael. It was years in the making. Years of being overlooked. Years of being useful, but never truly seen. He sat down heavily on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the water like the answers were written on the waves. His voice barely carried. I just thought, you were okay. You always seemed okay. I shook my head, feeling my chest tighten. That was the problem. I always seemed okay because I made myself okay. I swallowed my hurt when the phone didn't ring. I smiled through the lonely holidays, through the canceled dinners, through being told week after week that something else was more important. His shoulders sagged as the weight of my words started sinking in. I wasn't expecting this, he muttered. I didn't realize how much it hurt you. I took a deep breath, holding it for a moment before letting it out slowly. Do you remember the day you told me there wasn't room for me in that van, that I would slow everyone down? I felt something in me crack that day, Michael. Something I didn't even know could break. His hands tightened together, knuckles white. His lips parted, but no words came. I could see the memory flashing in his mind as clear as it was in mine. It wasn't just the van. It wasn't just the trip. It was every time you canceled Sunday dinner because you had something better to do. It was every birthday you forgot until the last minute. Every time I offered to help or just wanted to spend time together and got met with a sigh, a shrug, or a polite excuse. It was realizing I had become background noise in the life of the people I loved most. His head dropped, staring at the ground like it might swallow him whole. I didn't mean for it to feel like that, but it did. I paused, letting that sit. And it wasn't just feelings, Michael. It was choices. You borrowed against a house that wasn't yours. You treated my life, my future, like a resource you could tap into without asking. Like I was some retirement plan waiting in the wings. The sting of those words hit him hard. He flinched, looking like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find a defense that didn't crumble before it even left his mouth. I never thought you'd find out. He finally whispered, That's exactly the problem. You weren't worried about whether it was right, just whether I'd find out. That told me everything I needed to know. His eyes brimmed with something that looked like regret. Maybe guilt. Maybe the early tremors of shame. I never meant to hurt you. I just thought it was the way things worked. Families help each other. Families do help each other, I said softly. But help isn't the same as being taken for granted. Help isn't using someone until they have nothing left and calling it love. The wind carried the scent of the ocean between us, filling the silence that followed. He wiped at his face like he was surprised to find it wet. I didn't see it, Mom. I really didn't. I thought you liked being needed. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. I did like being needed. I loved it when it meant being part of the family. But I didn't like being needed only when it was convenient. I didn't like realizing that once I stopped saying yes, there wasn't much left between us. He nodded slowly, pressing his palms together. I guess I thought you'd always just be there. Waiting. Like you always were. That's the thing, Michael. I waited for years. I waited for things to change. For the calls to come without a reason behind them. For the visits that weren't just because you needed something. But I realized, if I kept waiting, I was going to spend the rest of my life in that same empty chair. Waiting. His shoulders trembled. His voice cracked. Is it too late? I shook my head, feeling both the sting of sorrow and the strange calm of truth. It's too late for things to go back. But it's not too late for you to learn from this. It's not too late for you to change. Just not for me. Not to get me back. I've chosen a different life now. He nodded, wiping at his face again. I get it. I don't like it. But I get it. I stood and reached for the doorknob, pausing before heading inside. My door is open to you, Michael. To the kids. Whenever you want to visit, but not because you need something. Only if you want to be here. Really be here. I stepped inside and closed the door, gently leaving him sitting there under the endless blue sky alone with his thoughts. News travels fast even when you're not looking for it. It wasn't long before I heard that Michael and his family had been forced to sell their home. The bank wasn't interested in excuses. The loan had been secured against something that no longer existed in his control. And now the consequences had come knocking. They packed up their big house in the suburbs, the one with the freshly painted shutters and the manicured lawn Marissa was so proud of. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that the sale was rushed. Below market value. Desperation rarely gives you good negotiating power. Their belongings crammed into a much smaller place on the less shiny side of town. I won't lie. A part of me felt a flicker of sadness. No mother dreams of seeing her child struggle like that. But that sadness passed, replaced by something far stronger. A sense of justice. A certainty that this was the natural consequence of choices made without thought for anyone else. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding. Sunset Bay welcomed me like I had always belonged here. The gallery I opened started small, just a sunny corner space with wide windows overlooking the ocean. I hung a few of my paintings there. Some landscapes, some simple seascapes. At first I thought no one would care. But they did. Locals stopped by often. Some admired, some bought, and some just came to chat. My little gallery became more than a place for art. It became a space for stories, laughter, and community. People who valued me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. I joined a local artist circle-led tours at the town's history museum, and every Saturday morning I met Evelyn for coffee at the corner cafe that overlooked the marina. There was a peace here that I had never known. A kind of joy that came not from serving others, but from simply existing as myself. One afternoon, as I watched the sun dip into the water, I sat down with a lawyer from town. We went over my will. The old one was gone, erased. This time, I made sure every word reflected what mattered to me. My home here in Sunset Bay. My gallery. My savings. Everything I had built. It would all go to my grandchildren. But not a penny until they were old enough to understand that love is not about taking. That family is not about convenience. That respect is earned by how you show up for the people who care about you. They wouldn't be allowed to sell the house or the gallery until they were well into adulthood. And if they never learned well, the local library and animal shelter would happily receive every last cent. Michael was excluded. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but because some lessons cost something. Some lessons have weight. I never told him. I didn't need to. Life has a way of teaching what words never could. From time to time, I still got a text. Usually short, polite, a hollow attempt to maintain some brittle bridge. I answered when it felt right. Other times, I let silence do the talking. Elliot and Lily, the kids, were different. They were young enough to still be curious, still open. Sometimes they called. Sometimes they wrote letters. I made it clear. My door was always open for them. Not as a backup plan. not as a free babysitter, but as their grandmother, someone who loved them for exactly who they were. Every evening as the sun spilled gold across the water, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, listening to the waves roll in. I often thought about how life had surprised me, about how sometimes the hardest moments crack you wide open in a way that lets the light finally get in. This was my happy ending, not the one I imagined when I was younger, not the one tied to a white picket fence Sunday dinners and being the forever selfless mother. No, this was an ending written by my own hands, painted in the soft blues of the ocean, etched in the salt air, carved into the rhythms of a life that finally belonged to me. And you know what? It was more than enough. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it is this. You are not a burden. You are not someone meant to be set aside or only remembered when you are needed. No matter how old you are or where you are in life, you deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve love that shows up, not love that only takes. And you deserve to wake up every morning knowing that your life belongs to you. For far too long, I thought my worth was measured by how useful I was to others. I believed that sacrificing my time, my energy, and even my happiness was just part of being a good mother, a good grandmother. But the truth is, that kind of giving without receiving that kind of quiet disappearing, it slowly erases who you are. I am here to tell you it is never too late to change that. It is never too late to reclaim your joy, your peace, and your sense of self. Whether you are 60 or 80 or somewhere in between, you can choose to stop waiting for someone else to make space for you and start making space for yourself. You were not put on this earth to be anyone's afterthought. You were meant to live fully, freely, beautifully. And I hope wherever you are right now, you believe that. Because you are worthy, always have been, always will be,